In September 2019, a 7-year-old boy named JJ stopped going to school. His teacher noticed. His grandmother noticed. His friends noticed. And when people started asking questions about where JJ was, his mother had an answer ready. She said he was fine. She said he was being homeschooled now. She said there was nothing to worry about. A few weeks later, his grandmother called the police. Officers went to the family home in Rexburg, Idaho. They knocked. They searched. They found no sign of JJ anywhere. They also found no sign of his 16-year-old sister, Tylee. Both children had vanished. And their mother, a woman named Lori Vallow, had disappeared too. When investigators eventually tracked her down, they found her in Hawaii, newly married and relaxed, smiling for photos on the beach. Her 2 children had been missing for months. She told police they were fine. She told them she had no idea what everyone was so worried about. She told them, with a calm that investigators described as deeply disturbing, that her children were safe. They were not safe, and they were not missing in the way anyone had assumed. What investigators would eventually find in the backyard of her new husband's Idaho property, buried in shallow graves, hidden in a pet cemetery, would shock an entire country and trigger one of the most complex, most disturbing, and most bizarre true crime cases in modern American history. Because this was not just a story about murder. It was a story about a woman who believed, genuinely, completely, without any apparent doubt, that God had told her it was necessary, that she was a goddess preparing the world for its end, that the people standing in her way were not people at all. They were dark spirits, zombies, obstacles to be removed so the apocalypse could begin. And by the time anyone fully understood what she had become, 4 people were dead and 1 more had narrowly escaped a bullet to the head. This is the complete story of Lori Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mom, and it is one of the most deeply unsettling true crime cases you will ever hear. To understand how Lori Vallow became the woman at the center of this case, you have to start at the beginning, because she was not always the person the world came to know. Before the apocalyptic beliefs, before the cult, before the murders, Lori Vallow was, by most accounts, a warm and charming woman who appeared to love her children and embrace her community. She was born in 1983 in San Bernardino, California, and raised in a large religious family. She was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon faith, and faith was a central part of her identity from childhood. She was described by people who knew her as vivacious, engaging, and charismatic. The kind of person who made friends easily. The kind of mother who took her children to church, who showed up to school events, who seemed genuinely invested in her family's well-being. She married several times. Her 4th marriage, to a businessman named Charles Vallow, appeared to be her most stable. Friends said it seemed like a genuinely happy relationship. Charles was devoted to Lori and to the children she brought into the marriage, including Tylee Ryan from a previous relationship, and JJ Vallow, a 7-year-old boy with special needs whom Lori and Charles had legally adopted together. Charles adored JJ. By all accounts, the family appeared functional, loving, and normal. And then, sometime around 2017, something began to shift. Friends and family noticed it first in small ways. Lori started talking differently. She had always been religious, but now her beliefs were taking on a different texture, more intense, more focused on the end of the world, more preoccupied with prophecy and spiritual warfare. She had discovered the books of a man named Chad Daybell, a doomsday author who lived outside Rexburg, Idaho, a man who wrote fiction novels about preparing for the apocalypse, who claimed to receive visions of the future, and who had built a small but devoted following of people who believed he had a direct connection to divine revelation. Lori began reading everything Chad Daybell had written. And then, in 2018, she met him. What happened next, according to people who witnessed it firsthand, was like watching someone walk through a door and never come back. Chad Daybell was not what most people would picture when they imagine a cult leader. He was quiet, mild-mannered, a husband and father of 5, living a seemingly ordinary life in rural Idaho with his wife Tammy. He worked in publishing, specifically the niche world of Mormon-adjacent apocalyptic fiction. He wrote books. He gave talks. He ran podcasts about end-times theology. He was not charismatic in the traditional sense. He was not loud or commanding or aggressively persuasive. But he had something that proved more powerful than any of those things. He had a framework. A complete, internally consistent belief system that explained the world in a way that made a certain kind of person feel, suddenly, completely certain about everything. According to Chad Daybell's theology, people could be rated on a spiritual scale. On one end were beings of pure light, people with elevated souls, chosen by God for a special purpose in the coming apocalypse. On the other end were what he called dark spirits, or in a language he and Lori began using between themselves, zombies. These were people whose souls had been taken over by darkness. People who appeared human on the outside but were spiritually corrupt, spiritually dangerous, spiritually beyond saving. The only way to free a zombie's soul, according to this theology, was for that person to die. Let that sit for a moment. Because this is the framework that would eventually be used to justify every murder that followed. When Lori met Chad in 2018, the two of them immediately began placing the people in their lives onto this spiritual spectrum. It was in those private conversations, reconstructed later through messages, testimony from friends, and court evidence, that a truly terrifying pattern emerged. One by one, the people closest to both of them began to be reclassified. Not as family members or friends or loved ones, but as dark spirits, as zombies, as obstacles. Lori told one close friend that she had started to believe her husband Charles was a zombie, that he was possessed, that he was dark. Another friend recalled hearing Lori and Chad discuss taking care of the dark spirits in their lives, phrasing that, at the time, those friends had not fully understood. The word zombie had seemed almost silly, almost harmless, like a metaphor. It was not a metaphor. Lori also told people, during her 2024 murder trial, something that the courtroom received in stunned silence. She said that she had died in 2002 during the birth of her daughter Tylee, and that when she came back, she had gained the ability to communicate with heaven. She said she had been told by divine sources that she was a goddess, that she was preparing the world for the second coming, that everything she did in service of God's plan. She was not performing when she said these things. She appeared to mean every word. And that is what makes this case so profoundly disturbing. Not the violence, though the violence is horrific, but the fact that the person at the center of it appeared to have no awareness whatsoever that what she was doing was wrong. In her mind, she was not a murderer. She was a servant of God, completing a divine mission. By early 2019, Lori Vallow's marriage to Charles was deteriorating rapidly. Charles had noticed the change in his wife. He had noticed the obsession with Chad Daybell, the escalating religious rhetoric, the way she seemed to be drifting further and further from the woman he had married. He was worried enough to go to the police in Gilbert, Arizona, in January 2019. Body camera footage from that visit captured him telling officers that his wife had become unhinged, that she believed she was a god preparing for the end of days, that she had threatened to murder him. He filed for divorce. On July 11, 2019, Charles Vallow went to the home where Lori was staying with the children to drop JJ off for school. What happened inside that house is a matter of contested testimony, but the outcome is not. Charles Vallow was shot dead by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Cox told police it was self-defense, that Charles had attacked him with a baseball bat, and he had fired in protection of his sister. Lori and Tylee, who were both present, gave accounts consistent with this version of events. No charges were filed at the time. The case was classified as a self-defense shooting, pending further investigation. But here is the detail that investigators would return to later. Within weeks of Charles's death, Lori Vallow had begun making plans to move to Idaho. to be closer to Chad Daybell, to begin the next phase of her life, the one she believed she had been spiritually prepared for. And her children, Tylee and JJ, were coming with her. What neither child understood, and what the people around them were only beginning to suspect, was that in the private language that Lori and Chad shared, both Tylee and JJ had already been reclassified. They had been labeled dark spirits. September 8, 2019. Lori Vallow, Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Lori's brother Alex Cox visited Yellowstone National Park. A photo was taken that day, JJ and Tylee together, smiling with their uncle nearby. It is one of the last known images of Tylee alive. She was 16 years old. Within weeks, both children were dead. The exact details of how Tylee and JJ died emerged slowly, through forensic evidence, through testimony, through the painstaking reconstruction that investigators built over months of work. What became clear was that both children had been killed separately and buried in the backyard of Chad Daybell's rural Idaho property, an area used partly as a pet cemetery, which investigators believe was chosen deliberately to mask any signs of recent digging. Tylee's remains were so severely damaged by fire that forensic identification required extensive work. JJ's body was found wrapped in plastic and duct tape. He was 7 years old. The man who conducted the physical burials, according to evidence presented at Chad Daybell's trial, was Alex Cox, Lori's brother, the same man who had shot Charles Vallow 7 weeks earlier. Alex Cox would never stand trial. In December 2019, he died suddenly from what was officially ruled a blood clot in his lungs. He was in his early 50s. His death remains, to many people close to the case, deeply suspicious, though no charges were ever filed related to his death. Meanwhile, Lori Vallow had moved forward with her life with extraordinary speed. She and Chad Daybell were married in Hawaii in November 2019, just 2 weeks after the suspicious death of Chad's wife Tammy, who had reportedly been shot at in October and then died in her sleep 10 days later. Chad had refused to allow an autopsy. The cause of death was initially recorded as natural causes. It was only when investigators began pulling the thread of Lori and Chad's trail of destruction that Tammy's body was exhumed and the true cause of her death, asphyxiation, was finally determined. When JJ's grandmother contacted police for a welfare check in November 2019 and officers discovered that both children were missing, Lori Vallow told them JJ was in Arizona with a family friend. That friend told police she had not seen JJ in months. The investigation that followed was one of the largest missing children searches in Idaho history, and it unfolded in public, through news cameras, through social media, through the anguished advocacy of grandparents and aunts and uncles who knew something was terribly wrong and could not get anyone to act fast enough. In February 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii. When reporters asked about her children, she said nothing. She showed nothing. She stood before cameras with the same flat, unreadable expression that would become one of the most disturbing images associated with this case. A mother who had just been told her children were missing, who appeared to feel nothing at all. In June 2020, investigators found the children's remains in Chad Daybell's backyard. The legal proceedings that followed were as complex and drawn out as the case itself. In May 2023, Lori Vallow was brought to trial in Idaho for the murders of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, and for conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell. The trial lasted several weeks. Lori chose not to testify. On May 12, 2023, the jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In May 2024, Chad Daybell went to trial for the same murders. He had spent the months leading up to the trial attempting to argue that Lori had manipulated him, that he had been seduced and emotionally controlled into believing the theology that justified the killings. The jury was not persuaded. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. But for Lori Vallow, the legal proceedings were not finished. She had also been charged in Arizona in connection with the 2019 murder of Charles Vallow and the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux, the estranged husband of her niece, who had been shot at from a passing vehicle in October 2019 and narrowly survived a bullet to the head. In April 2025, Lori Vallow went to trial in Arizona for the Charles Vallow conspiracy case. She chose to represent herself in court, a decision that observers described as a catastrophic miscalculation. Footage from the trial showed her smiling and appearing disengaged during testimony. One juror said afterward that she had not done herself any favors. After roughly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of conspiring to murder Charles Vallow. In June 2025, a second Arizona jury found her guilty of conspiring to murder Brandon Boudreaux, the man whose Jeep had been identified by police as connected to the shooting and who had survived because the bullet missed his head by inches. In July 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced to 2 additional consecutive life sentences for the Arizona convictions, stacked on top of the life sentences already handed down in Idaho. She is now serving multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. She will die in prison. In a post-verdict interview conducted in April 2025, after the Charles Vallow guilty verdict, Lori Vallow told a reporter she had been surprised by the outcome. She said she had not expected to be convicted. She spoke with the same unsettling calm that had defined her public persona throughout the entire case. She has never, in any public statement or court appearance, expressed remorse. She has never acknowledged that what she did was wrong. She has maintained consistently and completely that her actions are guided by God. Every case like this leaves a wreckage of people that the headlines rarely stop long enough to properly see. J.J. Vallow's grandmother, Kay Woodcock, was the woman who first called the police in November 2019. She was the one who refused to accept the story that J.J. was fine, that everything was normal, that there was no reason to worry. She pushed and pushed until investigators were forced to take the disappearance seriously. After the guilty verdict in 2023, she stood outside the courthouse and said 4 words to cameras. "We got her." Finally. Colby Ryan, Lori's adult son from a previous relationship, a young man who had grown up loving his mother, watched his siblings disappear, watched his mother be convicted of their murders, watched everything he believed about his family collapse. He has spoken publicly about the devastation of loving someone who turned out to be capable of something like this. About the impossibility of reconciling the mother he remembered with the woman in the courtroom. His grief is a particular kind, one that has no clean name. Tylee Ryan was 16. She loved her little brother, JJ. Family members describe how she treated him almost like her own child, how patient she was with him, how gentle, how devoted. The last known photo of her alive is from Yellowstone. She is in the background, out of focus, part of a moment that had no idea it was the last one. J.J. Vallow was 7 years old. He had special needs and a smile that people who knew him still talk about. He was adopted. He was loved. He spent the last months of his life in a house where the woman who was supposed to protect him had already decided, in the shared language of a belief system built on darkness and delusion, that he was something other than a child. Brandon Boudreaux, who survived the drive-by shooting, has spoken about the experience of knowing that people he once considered family had tried to have him killed, of living with the awareness that the bullet missed him by inches, of watching the trials unfold and trying to find some way to make sense of what had been done to him. There is no sense to be made. That is the honest answer. No framework, no theology, no psychological explanation makes the deaths of 2 children comprehensible. They were children. They were killed by the people who were supposed to keep them safe. And the woman who ordered it looked at cameras for years with no visible awareness that she had done anything wrong. There is a question at the center of the Lori Vallow Daybell case that nobody has fully answered. Was she a true believer, a woman who genuinely lost her grip on reality inside a belief system that told her she was a goddess and her children were demons? Or was she something colder than that, a calculated woman who used religious ideology as a cover story for decisions that were, at their core, about control, desire, and the removal of inconvenient people from her path to the life she wanted? Psychiatrists who have evaluated her have not reached a clean conclusion. The court system did not find her legally insane. The juries who heard the evidence found her guilty across multiple trials in multiple states. What we know for certain is this. A 7-year-old boy who called his grandmother every day stopped calling. A 16-year-old girl who loved her little brother never got to grow up. A man who went to the police because he was afraid of his wife was shot dead in a house he went to for the sake of his son. A woman who survived a bullet to the head by inches still wakes up every day knowing that people he trusted wanted him dead. And Lori Vallow Daybell is in prison, serving life sentences she will never complete, still, as far as anyone can tell, believing that she was right. That is the most disturbing part of all. Not the crime, not even the deaths, but the absolute, unshakable certainty of a person who caused all of this and feels no weight from any of it. If this story affected you, leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this case you couldn't stop thinking about. And if you want more true crime documentaries like this one, full stories, real depth, no filler, subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next.